Why do we only use the Authorised version? Is it sinful to use another version?
I think 5 minutes is ample for every question. I have 2 questions here. Why use the AV? And then, is it sinful? So I have 10 minutes. That's good. That's good.
You'll hear a ding.
Young people, thanks for having us here tonight. It's a great privilege. I suppose we go straight into this question about different versions, and we automatically begin to compare NIV, AV, or whatever you care to mention, alright? But who in the first place gave us the authority to have an English Bible at all? I mean, God, in His providence, had it to be penned in the Hebrew and the Greek. Why is it even right to have an English version? And the answer to that is very simple. I'm sure you recall maybe reading a passage. Let's say, thank you, Ron. Let's say in the New Testament, some of the disciples, or Christ Himself, okay, they quote from the Old Testament. They quote from Isaiah, or they quote from the Psalms. And one that comes to mind here, is I've written down here, is Matthew 21, verse 16. And Christ there is quoting the Old Testament. And He says, He uses the word, I think it's, I'll read it out to you actually, Matthew 21 and the verse 16. Have you never read, out of the mouths of babes and sucklings thou hast perfected praise? Let's see what the Old Testament says. Okay, the very passage which he is quoting is Hebrews 8, and it says here, out of the mouth of babes and sucklings hast thou ordained strength. Complete different word. And the reason for that Christ Himself isn't quoting from the Old Testament Hebrew. He's quoting what's called the Septuagint. And the Septuagint was a translation of the Hebrew. And there, straight away, Christ is confirming that translations are acceptable, because He's even using one, and the disciples were the same. So now, it is okay then to have an English translation. Why then do we hold so dearly to the AV? Well, the AV is based upon this idea of accurateness. It's the most accurate translation of the Bible, and that is absolutely key. Some people will say, it's really hard to understand. Some of the words are difficult. Number one, I don't agree with that, to be honest. But number two, let me quote what Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones said here. We don't bring the Bible down to the level of the least of men. We train men up. And that's a really good statement. The Bible deserves the best of the language, or mother tongue language, that we can put it into. Like, what would stop someone today putting the Bible into text language? What's to stop someone? Alright? Well, I tell you what should stop someone is the sheer reverence and respect for the Word of God. It deserves the best of language that we can possibly give to it. Let me say something about the method of translation. I'll give you a big word here. The AV translation used a principle called formal equivalence. Formal equivalence. And all that means is, for the Hebrew or Greek word, there is an equivalent English. It's pretty straightforward. You would expect that from the Bible. Whatever word is in Hebrew or Greek, you'll have an English word to translate it. So the AV is based upon precision and accuracy, yet make it understandable. A lot of the other versions don't use that method. They use something called dynamic equivalence. And what that means is, they'll have let's say a Hebrew word, or a Hebrew text, and instead of translating it word for word, they'll just kind of give you the gist of what that word means. They'll just, put it into their own words. Now, I would have a problem reading a Bible which is purely based upon someone's opinion as to what it means. This is way too important for it to be merely translated by someone's opinion. How do I know that person's opinion was right or wrong? So the very governing principle many of the other versions use is just entirely inadequate for my soul. That's the method of translation, the choice of original translation. Okay, so there's loads of different old manuscripts. Okay, it's not that there's just one old Bible found dating back 4,000 years. That's not what you have. You have different manuscripts, and they're all put together. And there are different groups of manuscripts. Let me just mention two here right now. You have a group called the received texts. The received texts. And that's about 90 to 95% of all the manuscripts we have. All right? And that's what the AV is based on. Then you have another group. And they're a lot older. They're a lot older. There's also a lot more faults in them, contradictions. And many people use those because they think, well, they're older, so they're more, well, perhaps closer to the actual date in which the original was written. That does not necessarily make it more accurate, because it could have been written in times of persecution. And when you have a selection of these and they all contradict one another, they're not to be used, if possible. Not if you have something which is much more reliable. Maybe I could mention a couple of versions. You have, suppose you have the AV, the New King James. And I suppose a lot of people think, well, it's King James, so it mustn't be too far away. I'm told that the New King James has 100,000 changes from this King James version. That is not updating something, that's a whole new Bible. And that's very, very significant. I've heard it said before, what's more dangerous, monopoly money or counterfeit money? If you want to buy something with monopoly money, people will know it's obviously not right. But something which is really, really close to the original, like counterfeit money, even more dangerous. And maybe that's what you have with the New King James. So on the basis of method, the AV comes out on top. On the basis of the choice of the original manuscripts, the AV comes out on top. Let me just say, if you permit me, Stephen, the other question here was, is it sinful to use other versions? You need to understand what sin is. Sin is something that will damn your soul to hell. If you read the NIV, will God damn your soul to hell? Sin is something that Christ had to die for on the cross. Did Christ have to die on the cross to save you because you read the NIV once? That's not the case. The AV is the only Bible I could wholeheartedly offer to you for your daily source of manna from heaven, and I would above all advise you the AV is the best English translation we have.